there's yet another absolutely fundamental point that everyone is completely overlooking. I'm sure they've put something in the water or something. It's got to have been this McDonald's, or KFC or junk food diet they've been feeding us. It's a no-brainer. It doesn't. You don't have to go into detailed clauses, but I always go into clauses of law anyway. I always go into the Human Rights Act and not the articles, right into the clauses of the sections and so forth. I always go into the details, but it is always the eureka moments of something that is fundamental that someone hasn't really understood why. It always comes down to the question, why, and what actually is this? What is it for? What is this process for? Why did they create it? And then you go to the time when they did it and why there was a need for it, and then you get your answer. And in the modern time, when the law, the American First Amendment hasn't changed yet, a long time has passed, and there's all this new modern, world, and I think people forget what the early newspapers were used for and the role, particularly in advertising, even though they're all private, but people had to use them to communicate. I know people could print flyers and leaflets, but the newspapers had a established network of readers. If people wanted to publish flyers and banners and billboards, even like pamphlets and so forth, I suppose they could distribute them around the local area or county, or even across the whole of the United States. But, there's a lot. But why would you do that if there's a newspaper? If you're running for election and there's already a network of newspaper outlets and they already have why would you get pamphlets printed? I'm sure, if I'm wrong, then fair enough, but I'm absolutely certain that if you look in the early 17 and 1800s newspapers, they will have election advertisements in the newspapers, in private newspapers for election. And if there is evidence of that, if they have them, then I'm absolutely certain that, and particular petitions whether it's in the public notices or whether it's, paid for privately or whether they put a few free ones in, it's evidence that it did cover the freedom of the press, the newspapers, privately owned newspapers, freedom of use of the press. Like I'm saying, if you weren't making money, if it wasn't if it wasn't commercial, if you weren't a business, you didn't have to pay anyway to put a notice in the newspaper. And you got them with stories anyway that it's they're asking people to come tell them stories. But anyway, so look. When you're doing petitioning, right? When you are doing, this is like, the level of insight this is and how it's just overlooked or even disregarded. I really don't even know how you could just shrug or just, make a comment about this that disregards it. In England or in America, petitioning, the activity of it, which we know, that activity and everything that is used for it, including its adverts and promo, those are covered by the right to petition when you're doing them, right? All the time. Now, this is the problem with YouTube. Does YouTube allow petitions on there? Yes. And does it allow Robert F. Kennedy and elections? Yes. So the policy is not saying that they're not allowed on there. So that there's no policy that says you can't do petitioning on there. Or elections. So if we go back to what I just said, petitioning law and the rights cover petitioning in that country. Now, if the newspaper claimed it didn't allow petitioning on there, but it does. Whenever you're petitioning in a country or nation, you're covered by the law for that activity. Because you can't separate the law governing it from the action. It would be like, I don't really know how I can explain this. And if I explain this to Andrew Bridge, an MP, I'm sure that he must have a eureka moment, no matter how simple it is, or primary school it is, or putting like star shapes through star holes in a box and triangles through triangle shape, right? When you're smoking in England, you don't separate the smoking, the act of smoking, I'm having a cigarette, from the law. The law that governs smoking applies to smoking, no matter where you are. But it's true, there are different laws, but they're all in the act that covers smoking. The acts that cover smoking that tell you where you can and can't smoke, whether it's private or public or whatever, you don't separate the act of law from the smoking, from doing it. Smoking is governed by those laws. Now, to see whether you can or you can't smoke, you look at the law that governs smoking. You don't ask the pub owner. The law tells you, not the pub owner. You don't separate the legislation of smoking from the act of smoking, because the act of smoking is governed by smoking law, not Pumpleton's big cake factory. Now, petitioning is governed by the right to petition. You don't separate from it. That's the law that governs it, wherever you are. So, when you go on YouTube, if they were trying to say, you can't do petitions on here, or we're not having any election candidates, that's a different argument. They're saying you can't even have it on there at all. But they're not. They're saying you can have Andrew Bridgen on there. You can have political parties. You can do petition videos. So they're governed by the law of petitioning. You don't separate it from there. So you don't actually look at YouTube, because YouTube aren't the law. And and whatever they're trying to say, policies or whatever, still isn't the law. Now, what does the law say? Says that you can't be prosecuted or held to any commitments. And in America, you can't have the right abridged. There would be a bridge in it if they said that you can't go on YouTube. There would be a bridge in the right, wouldn't they? If they didn't even let RF Kennedy on for candidate onto YouTube, he couldn't get on there, but he's on there. I won't be able to upload any petition videos or 38 Degrees or Change.org. Why can't they stop us going on there? Because of the right, actually. Because I think that if they could stop us from going on there, they would have done, but they can't. So, because that law governs that thing, and because we are on there doing it, you have to be governed by that law when you're on there. You have to be. They don't say you can, it's almost like coming in with a dog on a lead. They don't say, oh, you can come in here, but you have to leave your rights outside. You don't separate them. It will almost be like saying, you come into my pub, but leave the smoking law outside. Do you know what I mean? It has to be a fundamental, that is it. And therefore, the commitments that you aren't to be held by must mean wherever you are and whatever you're doing. It has to be. Because otherwise, I mean, you wouldn't be in there. If anyone's let you in anywhere and let you come in, right? And if you're doing it, then you're there and that law's applying. Or else, they'd be trying to say that you couldn't come in the first place. Now, what Mohan's doing is he's trying to say, you can kind of do, he's trying to decide, or Google are trying to decide that they're trying to manage your petitioning. Well, they can't. Either you can go in there and do it, or you can't. And what does the law say? It's like smoking. To find out whether you can smoke in a pub or not, you don't actually go and look at the policy of the pub, because the policy of the pub can only be made on what the laws are. You look at what the law says, if you are allowed inside or not. Now, if the law says, it depends on the policy, if it's a private house or a private club, then the law will say you look at the policy. But in the right to petition, it doesn't say in the right to petition that, you can do it in private but not in public, or vice versa, or subject to policy. It says you can't be held to any commitments. It has to mean that. It has to. It's just pure logic. Added on to all the rest of the points that I made in the other videos about the freedom of the press, freedom of use of the press, particularly in the 17 and 1800s, when it was the main distribution network for informations, and you didn't have to pay for something that wasn't for profit or commercial anyway. YouTube is free ads.